I don't know if anybody has been more focused and also alert of what happens with EA Sports with the release of the game. Finally, after a long, long time, Matt Brown has been all over this, along with many other things today. Matt now joins us on 365 Sports. And Matt, how excited are you? Is it like Christmas Day when the EA Sports put out that image yesterday?
I got to tell you, it's not quite Christmas, but it is nice to have the internet not screaming at me for a change. You know, comparing the public response to yesterday with the national championship game, when so many people seem to be convinced that I worked for EA and was like personally responsible for them not getting this trailer. It's fun to see so many people excited. It's fun to see a reminder that this project is very much happening here. It's fun to see many of the things that I've been talking about kind of come alive here on video. I hope that this meets everyone's expectations, because it's a big deal for so many people and not just consumers.
Matt, I wonder, could you convince them it's probably too late for 25, but for 26, could you maybe license out Athletic Director Simulator 4000 and make that part of it?
It would be pretty fun, wouldn't it? You know, there's been a running joke, and I'm not optimistic this happens, but you know, in a lot of these sports games, you have like a Twitter-like newsfeed, feature, right? Where it might show various reporters talking about things that happened during your dynasty. And I've developed relationships with a couple of developers, and I'm like, listen, I would love to be in this game. You don't have to pay me. Put me in for free. And all I want to do is like be in the newsfeed, saying updates about next year's game. And you can have everybody else talk about like upsets and what's happening on the field, and have that be a little Easter egg. We'll see. I don't know if maybe every EA executive has the same sense of humor as some of those people. But if anybody at Electronic Arts wanted to talk about a simulator and how to incorporate some of those features into the game, they've all got my phone number.
Matt, millions of views on the trailer release and millions of people talking about it. It seemed like yesterday. Any clue from the folks that you talked to of just kind of how they've received all the news and just how the reception went over to the trailer break-in?
Oh, I mean, everyone I've talked to, at and around EA is over the moon. And, part of it is because, the people that are like making the blood and guts of this game, that are doing the rendering, doing the coding, working on trying to make this a realistic adaptation, they're college football sickos too. And it's hurtful for them, I think, to not be able to tell the world about what they're doing. And then have to read a lot of mean criticism of the project, people saying it's not going to happen, that they don't trust you. So being able to finally share that with the world and get an almost universally excited, positive news, I think has to feel great for them. It's exciting for the schools themselves. I don't know if Baylor has, but I've seen plenty of programs have already put out their own individual, graphics confirming their participation and talking about how they're going to be part of the game. It's just very exciting for anybody involved in college football, whether you're a player or a fan or an administrator or a coach. This is, it's been a decade since we've had a video game celebration of all of the things that make this such a compelling sport.
Can you even try to explain how many people are involved in making this happen?
For it's for the game itself, it's thousands of people. For the trailer, it's dozens, right? Like if we're talking about the game, it's funny for those of you guys that are old enough and remember the very first college football games that came out in the Sega Genesis. You had the Bill Walsh games before the NCAA series started. Back then, you literally would only have about 2 people programming the game. Two or three people. You'd have a handful of animators. Your play testers are guys elsewhere in the company. You ship the whole thing and it's 12 guys, right? The manual is mostly explaining how to play the game. You can't do that now. Now these are hundreds of millions of dollars in budgets. You have animators and testers and coders from all around the world. There's a lot of people working on this in Florida. You have the motion capture and the 3D rendering of the stadiums is enormously complicated. And that's just EA, right? They've also gone to every school and asked for help in getting the right helmets, getting the right historical uniforms. I talked to one fella at Troy who was one of their best defensive players, a football player. He was the guy that took all the pictures for the stadium for it to be rendered in the game, right? It's a lot of people that aren't going to show up on the credits it's the AAA studio video game development now is just an enormously expensive, complicated project, which can be frustrating to fans, but that's what it takes to make what we enjoy on PlayStations now.
Matt, what do you know about the gameplay or anything like that? I mean, I know that, they have the Madden engine that they can kind of just move over and change the graphics, but there are different things that go with this. So what do you think, that will be like, or is it going to be kind of a different thing?
So what's been impressed upon me as I've talked to communication staffers and developers at EA is that they want this game to be distinct intellectual property from Madden. So yeah, there are some similarities. It's the same technical engine, and they're both football games, but that same engine also runs like the golf games and many of their other sports games. An engine can mean lots of different stuff. And what the folks I've talked to have been, pretty clear on is college football is a different sport than pro football. And part of that is in pageantry and iconography. And that's why I've written so much, and they spend so much of this commercial talking about marching bands and uniforms and rivalries and stadiums and all of the kind of, accoutrements that make every school unique. But it's also about the gameplay itself, right? Like even now it's become a little bit less popular, but read option plays are more popular in college than they are in the NFL. RPOs are a much bigger thing in college than they were in 2013, 2014, the last time we had this game. You have a much greater diversity in scheme and formation and play style than you have in the NFL. And the rules themselves of how you build a team are different. The thing I would want people to know is like recruiting is literally not the same thing as it was in 2014, not just because of transfers in the NIL, which I'm told are going to be a part of the game, but the signing limit is different. National Signing Day is now National Signing Days. How players are moved and are retained and are added to rosters, they're all different. And if you want to make a realistic depiction of college football right now, your video game has to reflect those things. So I would tell people, this game is not going to feel like a reskin of Madden, both in the gameplay itself and in all of the stuff we do when we're not throwing around the football.
You mentioned, Matt, that NIL will be a part of the game. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes and how they do that. But in terms of NIL for the players, what is the, compensation going to look like for an actual football player? And how does all that work, given that's how the game got shut down to begin with?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? And folks at EA that I've talked to have been pretty clear that there's no contract yet. They have not sent out a contract to anybody. Like those terms are not completely finalized. I know there was some reporting earlier that the terms of the deal were $500 per player. And while I can't confirm that, I suspect the final number won't be too far off of that. And the reason why that number is way smaller than Madden, which is often, I think around 15,000 in a given year. For one, EA would like to include as many scholarship football players across all of college football as they possibly can. That's over 11,000 people, right? That's more than 4 times the number of people that are in Madden. I think the phrasing that EA has used internally and from talking to schools is this college football game is going to digitally represent more real people than any sports video game ever made. That's a very ambitious project, and that's going to be expensive. That's going to drive down the individual, value a little bit. Madden also is going to sell way more copies in this game, despite all of the pent up excitement and energy around it. What I'm told is going to happen is once spring ball's done and the transfer windows have closed, and we have a pretty good idea who's actually going to be on the team, leading into this year, that EA is going to use a company called One Team Partners. That they're going to send out a contract through, I think it's the CLC Compass app that many players already have installed on their phones to inspect the terms. They opt in. The EA will use the headshots from their official team photos to create a digital rendering of the player. Player gets the base check, and the player's likeness is put in the game. And if the player doesn't sign the paperwork, then that guy's IP is not going to be in the game. You'll have a randomized player. So I don't think they're going to get everybody just because some 20-year-olds are not going to sign paperwork because that's what 20-year-olds do. But the intention is to get thousands and thousands and thousands of people into this game.
So there's a question from one of our members in the chat room. Maybe it's a dumb question, MC Gusto, but does Matt see a decline in the play by older fans due to the games being so complex?
That's not a dumb question at all. And in fact, I think that's a good question. One of the things that I think football games have had to do in the past is offer different levels of accessibility. And I've joked about this too, right? Like when this game comes out, I'm definitely going to be playing, but I'll be 37 when it comes out. I've got 2 little children. I'm not the same video game player I was when I was playing this when I was 20 in my off-campus apartment in Columbus, when the only things I really cared about were this game and girls and finding something fun to do on Friday night. Like I'm going to suck, right? I don't have the schematic knowledge that maybe some other esteemed ball knowers in this listenership have. So, I mean, I'm going to have to adjust some sliders a little bit. I'm going to have to find ways so I can still have a fun experience. If you want an extremely complicated one, that option's been available to you in Madden. That option's been available to you in NCAA. I would imagine that would be the case here too. But if you just want to have fun with your friends, I think that there's going to be ways to turn down the intensity a little bit.
Well, I can just tell you, the last time I bought Madden when my nephews were still young, Matt, there was some slider moving down, 1 for them because they didn't know football like I did, and 2 for me because my hand-eye coordination is not what it was. It's the different thing altogether. So glad to hear that. But as far as you mentioned that less people will buy this than Madden, and I mean, obviously, because Madden in the NFL they're undefeated. It's such a huge, huge thing. But is part of them having to rebuild back up a fan base that is, I'm 43, you're 37, Garrett's 39, Craig's, about the same age. Like, we were the wheelhouse of that game 20 years ago and then 11 years ago when it left. But since then, like, there might be some young people who like it, but for the most part, the massive video game audience hasn't seen it during their developmental years.
That's exactly right. And this is why it's interesting, because I get pushback on this in reporting from fans who think like, well, I love it and all my friends love it, and I'm in Starkville where college football is a civic religion, so of course everybody here is going to love it. What do you mean it's not going to sell as much as Madden? And like the projections I've honestly heard from licensing professionals are, we hope it sells 30% of Madden. 25, 30% would be a win. Part of that is, the NFL is global, and the NFL is this behemoth. You haven't had this game here in a decade, but forecasting exact sales numbers is tricky for that exact reason. If you were a guy in your early 30s to early 40s for nostalgia reasons, we know you're going to buy the game. The EA is going to get your $60, your $70. We don't know exactly how 20-year-olds are going to respond. We don't know how people who don't have that built-in nostalgia are going to respond. We don't know how college football casuals are going to respond, or if people are going to play this game who aren't necessarily big college football fans at all. There are people, as crazy as this sounds, that play sports games pretty religiously and don't watch that sport. Like, I probably play more NHL video games than I do watching actual hockey games. It's a different experience, and that's their ability to sell that is going to depend on how good the game is. I'm sure this one is going to do well commercially, but that's going to be a big question. Can they convert people who don't revere the NCAA 14 game because it was an important part of their formative adult years?
Matt, elsewhere, you had a piece in your newsletter, I guess it was about a week or so ago, talking about all the feverish, I guess, hand-wringing over the Big Ten and the SEC and this alliance. It's not called the Alliance. And you laid out a lot of reasons for why it's not quite time to panic if you're not one of those two because, well, quite frankly, courts run college sports in so many ways nowadays. I guess if I'm wrong in kind of summarizing it that way, please feel free to correct me, but can you kind of dive into that just a little bit? Because there's so much talk about the breakaway, as you know, and those two control everything, but not as much as maybe people think, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly the summation. And I've been kind of, I've been burned by making a big deal out of press releases that athletic directors and presidents are talking before. Here's the reality. It makes sense for the Big Ten and SEC senior leaders to talk about NCAA governance reform, about the college football playoff. And maybe if I was a Big 12 fan, I should be a little nervous about that part. But and also what it means to be a college athlete right now. That makes sense. They have the most money. They have the most political clout. They have the biggest brands. But it doesn't matter what anybody in that room decides about amateurism or about athlete classification or revenue distribution, because all of that is going to have to be okayed by courts. You can make whatever system you want, and if in 9 months the federal district court says college football players are employees, or the NLRB says college football players are employees, you have to throw out what you did, because now you have to comply with those rulings. And you have been deeply unsuccessful at lobbying Congress to go change those rules for you. It's both good news and bad news. I think it's just the reality. College sports is changing. And college football players at places like Baylor and Texas Tech and Houston and BYU and in the ACC in 2 years are more likely than not going to be considered employees. And those schools are going to directly compensate those athletes, and there's going to be some level of revenue sharing and probably some element of the CBA. We don't know if that will also include volleyball players. We don't know if that will include volleyball players at Houston Baptist, or I guess Houston Christian now, right? Or Stephen F. Austin, or UTRGV. It might even extend all the way down to Trinity or West Texas A&M, right? Or Angelo State. Like that. These are the big existentially kind of questions. And there's nothing that Tony Petitti or Greg Sankey can say in a boardroom that changes any of that. So that is both maybe liberating or maybe terrifying. But those are the kind of folks that are going to really shape what this industry becomes in the near future.
If you've addressed this already, I apologize. But what keeps a player? I think you mentioned $500 for a player to be a part of this game. What's going to keep? For example, let's say this was available last year, that Caleb Williams wants to make more money than Blake Shapen when it comes to him being in the game.
Yeah, a fair question. And this is what anybody would say, I think, to those individuals, right? If you are a professional athlete and you are in the NFL or the NBA or anything else, your video game rights are part of a group license that's negotiated by your union. Mm-hmm. And those players all make the same amount of money, right? Like the quarterback for the Lions and the long snapper for the Lions get the same Madden check.
Okay.
The only differences are the people that are on the cover and people that are able to negotiate separate marketing deals. So if you don't like that, which is fine, you don't have to opt in. You just won't be in the game. But there isn't a mechanism for you in the pros to have that individual negotiation. So if you are, Caleb Williams isn't going to be in the game this year because he's going to be in the NFL. But if you're for a superstar in college football this year, I think there's a possibility that some of them could sign individual marketing contracts with EA, where EA says, like, okay, for you to be in the football game, I'm paying you $700. But if you make 5 Instagram stories promoting the game, I'll pay you $25,000 because you're big and famous, and that will help promote the game. That's entirely possible. EA does that with Madden. NBA 2K does that with their video games to give Devin Booker more money than whoever's the third string guard for the Mavericks or something. But that's how it works. And there may be a couple of players who decide not to be a part of the game for that exact reason, just like that's the case for games now. I mean, you guys might remember this. Like, Michael Jordan wasn't in a lot of the NBA Live games. Everybody else was. He wanted more money. That's fine. Charles Barkley wasn't either.
Matt, do you think this will open the door for college basketball to come back? Because specifically, that was the video game that started this little war.
Yeah, I get this question a ton. And here are the two answers I can give. I have been told that there's no immediate a desire for EA or 2K, the company that makes the NBA games, to make a standalone college basketball game right now. The college basketball games actually stopped being made before the end of the college football games, and the big reason for that was they didn't sell very well. College basketball is way more niche than college football. However, there is hope in the licensing industry that if this college football game is not just commercially successful, but the licensing component of athletes is painless, that it will make it easier to get the green light for a college basketball game. And this hasn't happened yet, but what I think would actually be easier would be for what we call a non-AAA game or an indie studio to make something that's way less complicated than March Madness 2016. Maybe it lives on your phone or for the PC, and licensed players. Like, I don't think I'm telling tales here out of school. We've had conversations with some schools in CLC about licensing for Athletic Director Simulator. You know, if the price was right, would I be willing to pay a couple $1,000s and find a way to work in like a bunch of athletes at Baylor into the game and use their real names? Sure. I mean, that would probably be pretty good business here for me, and we can afford that. And that is something I think could happen faster than maybe a $70 college basketball video game made by 2K.
I know you've got other things to do. You had a story yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the day before, about everyone's discussing the SEC, Big Ten, and all that. And what else is the future for the others? You've kind of brought that up. But what about who's taking care of FCS in Division III? What was the reaction on that this week?
Yeah, well, I think that reaction to that story from non-industry was predictably swallowed up by the video game. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, all right, we can talk about this again next week, right? Like, I know no one wants to eat your vegetables when mom made pizza rolls. I understand. I'm not mad about that. But the I got right from within college sports was favorable, because this is touching a nerve, I think, for a lot of administrators. It's not to take anything away from Yormark or Sankey or people that are leading these major conferences, because there's not a lot of the rest of the 200 schools in Division I don't agree on a bunch of things. Like Abilene and the SFA are different schools from the kind of people that are in like the NEC or the Horizon League or something, right? They might not agree on some other things, but nobody's really carrying the flag for their interests, and not just about legal interests, which I talked about a lot here, but I don't mean to be too alarmist. There's some real legitimate talk about ending the concepts of universal automatic qualification for postseason events. Not just the men's basketball tournament, but volleyball and soccer and baseball. And there's some debate among the FCS 1 AAA level about, maybe there's a compromise, right? One thing that was floated to me by a couple of ADs, and some are quoted in the story, is this idea of maybe having more than one tournament. Like, we can use baseball here for an example and say, okay, if you want to sponsor at least 25 baseball scholarships and have an operating budget of X, Y, and Z, you're eligible for an invite to the NCAA tournament. And if you don't want to do that because you don't have the money, that's fine too. Your conference champion gets to play in the mega gentrified Little League World Series, or like college baseball tournament B or something, right? I think Ryan Ivey, the Stephen F. Austin AD, was like likening it to Texas high school classifications, right? You got a tournament for the biggest schools, tournament for the medium schools, tournament for the smaller schools. Maybe you can do something like that. And if you're a small school that's amazing, like a Dallas Baptist, you can commit and opt in to the bigger financial considerations and play out. Not saying that that's imminent, but these are real conversations that are happening here that might accommodate the SEC's desire for more access and money, and maybe have more equitable postseasons for everybody else.
Thank you. We had one more question about the EA Sports game. Is there a number that you know of? And the question was, is 2 million copies successful? Is there a number out there that would make that? Is that too early for that?
It might be a little bit too early. It's a good question. I think I'd want to spend some more time studying, because I want to say 2014. I think it's so close to 2 million. The conversations I've had have been less about raw units and more about benchmarking it to Madden. Right. So it's like, if you hit 25 to 30% of what Madden does, that's excellent. And that also means that that's revenue, not just from units sold. The thing that gamers don't like, but Wall Street really does, is that these companies make a lot of money through microtransactions, whether that's like through Madden Ultimate Team mode or are people buying extra money for DLC. And so maybe if the NCAA game hypothetically doesn't sell as many copies, but those copies are worth $110 per user for EA, there's still a smashing success. We'll kind of see how it goes. There's a lot of excitement and positive momentum, but there's some real unknowns here too.
Thank you, Matt. As always, great stuff. Matt started his hour with Paul Feinbaum and then went up a notch with joining us here on 365 Sports. Matt Brown from Extra Points. And